have accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Green Lantern fans, welcome and thank you for joining us for episode number 142 of the podcast of OA. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and we've got a little bit of a different episode lined up for you this time around. Our good buddy Phil Bova went on vacation for a few weeks to Las Vegas, and while he was gone, I was contacted by longtime friend and supporter of the show, Ralph Apel, and Ralph, he runs a number of podcasts. He does the Kaiju podcast, and he's a creator from It Came From the VCR. He has his own podcast, obviously, organization, and does a Patreon for Casino Skunk's Secret Society. And Casino Skunk is Ralph's online handles. And while Phil was gone, Ralph contacted me and said, "Hey, Myron, I know Phil's gone. How would you like it if I came on and we chatted about Green Lantern together, shared our mutual histories with the characters, and I would give you an episode content while Phil was on vacation?" So I got back to Ralph, and we had some scheduling to deal with because Ralph was going on vacation himself. We recorded this past week, and just before we were set to record, Phil got home, so Phil joined us. So we've got a little bit of a Green Lantern roundtable for you to listen to for this episode. So we're not talking about a specific Green Lantern episode or issue. We're going to just be doing some Green Lantern chat with a new buddy of ours. So I hope you enjoy that content. Before we jump into that, there's a couple of things I want to mention just to bring up for folks. You can now find the podcast of OA on radio.com. And right now, the podcasts for radio.com are only on the mobile app, but it is another avenue for you to listen to our Green Lantern content. So check us out there if you are a user of radio.com. And the other thing I really want to pump up is an audio production being done by some Green Lantern fans. It's called Green Lantern Ring of Victory. And Green Lantern Ring of Victory is free to anybody who wants to listen to it. It's going to be on YouTube. I will have a link to that as well as to Ralph's content in the show notes. But Green Lantern Ring of Victory, you may have seen an article on the blog of OA about it. Ring of Victory is a audio drama with an all-volunteer cast of voice actors, and it's an adventure that talks about, or it highlights Rotlop Fan, who is a fan favorite Green Lantern character. Very few, if any, I believe, Earth Lantern appearances in this one at all, which I think is refreshing because it really highlights the alien nature of the Green Lantern Corps and reinforces the science fiction part of the Green Lantern mythology. And you'll see, or should I say you'll hear, characters like Bizd and Izamat Cole show up. They have prominent roles in this one. So please do check it out. And I'm going to run, before we start with a chat with Ralph, I'm going to run a promo for that just so you can get an idea. But this is being spearheaded by Ian Harrington. And Ian, he did the Larfleeze Christmas special motion comic a few years ago, which I love to highlight because I think it's a fantastic production. This, I'm sure, will be the same, as you'll tell from the little audio teaser I'm about to air. So sit tight, listen to that, and then jump back in and you'll hear some conversation with Phil and Ralph and I.
In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light.
There are many tales in the Book of Oa, but have you ever heard one that's not about a Green Lantern?
In loudest din.
Captain, to all hands, load the escape pods. This is a full evacuation.
But sir, the gravity! The pods won't make it!
Or hush profound.
So, then we're doomed.
My ears catch evil's slightest sound.
Attention, Green Lanterns. You are harboring Grylar.
Let those who toll out evil's knell.
This is a crime punishable by extermination.
Beware my power, the F-sharp bell!
Green Lantern, Ring of Victory, a fan-made audio drama, premiering on YouTube, June 29th, 2019.
Yeah, I just got back from vacation on Sunday. I was in Ireland.
Oh, you lucky dog, you.
Yeah, my friend and my podcast partner was getting married, and at one point
Okay, guys, how's it going?
He asked about our podcast. I'm like, dude, you're getting married. Don't bring up the podcast. Enjoy your time here.
Right. So Phil, how was your vacation?
Oh, it was excellent, Myron. It was definitely hot in Vegas, and it was funny because when we drove from Vegas to San Diego, it was actually cool in San Diego. It was like in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
But it was nice. It was a nice 2-week trip.
2 weeks. We were gone for 6 days, and I couldn't wait to get back home. Even though we were in Ireland, there's something I don't know. We got homesick. Our flight was 11 hours. We went to Ireland, Phil. I downloaded a bunch of Green Lantern trades that I've been buying that I bought off Comixology because I can't there was a big chunk of my time where I wasn't reading Green Lantern, and it was mostly the last 5 issues of New 52 until the Grant Morrison run. Like it's a huge chunk of time where I was just like, I can't keep up with this many books. And then but so lately I have been, and so I just downloaded a bunch, and of course I just spent my whole plane flight watching Marvel movies.
That's awesome.
And I think Venditti's Rebirth stuff was better than New 52.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I've kind of been going through. I've been going through Green Lanterns first. I've been enjoying, half enjoying that book. I really like Jessica Cruz. I'm not really huge into Simon, but for some reason I've been connecting to that book a little bit more for some reason. Yep. And I just have one more trade and then I'm done with that. And I've read that entire run. I think it's taken me about 4 months to blast through something like 7 trades or something.
Wow.
Yeah. And so
dedication, man. Dedication.
Well, yeah, I was reading them simultaneously, that and the Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns, Green Lantern Corps, I think is what it was called. And that was getting too much, so I'm going to focus on one book. And yeah. But
cool.
But yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for coming on. It's funny, I consider myself a lifelong Green Lantern fan. I'll kind of give you my secret origins, so to speak. I was born in 1977, and I watched Super Friends, and so I was aware of the character Green Lantern. And then somewhere in the 1980s, they had the Trivial Pursuit games. And,
yeah.
And I had to have been under 10 years old, and one of the questions had something to do with the characters Hal Jordan, Guy Gardner, and John Stewart are all part of this, I don't know, comic book police force or something like that. And I knew the answer. I said Green Lantern, and my family was stunned, completely stunned. And so since that moment, I was like, I'm going to be a Green Lantern fan. And then in 1990, I think it was 90, when Volume 3 came out.
Yep, that was right around that time.
Yeah, I started actually getting into comic books, and my mom encouraged it because I, to this day, do not like reading. I can't read a book. It puts me to sleep. Even reading comics is a good way for me to get some sleep. But it was easier for me to connect to the comic books, and since that #1 was on the spinner rack in a drugstore, I was like, oh cool, Green Lantern #1, let me jump right in. And from then on, I've pretty much stayed consistent. I actually subscribed to that series of Green Lantern, where you would get it monthly in your mail in the cellophane.
Wow.
For about I think up until about issue 30, somewhere around there. And then I had a local comic book store, and I had a pull list and stuff. And so that was around mid-90s when Kyle Rayner was introduced, and I really felt connected to that character. At the time I was in high school, I liked to draw comic book characters, and I like to draw, cartoon characters and stuff. And there's something about the Kyle Rayner character that I kind of connected with. And so Kyle is my favorite Lantern. It's weird to say. I love Hal Jordan. I love all the Lanterns. Like I'm pretty much a fan of every Lantern. Phil, I know you're not a fan of Simon Baz, but I find some sort of kind of value to him at some points. I don't think I mentioned Jon Stewart. I do like Jon Stewart as well. But yeah, that's kind of where it happened. I dropped off a little bit when I started going out with my wife and started kind of focusing my attention more towards my relationship. But I came back with Rebirth, and so my reading now is catching up with Silver Age, keeping up with the 80s stuff. I've read like Hard Traveling Heroes, and I've been trying to sort of fill the gaps. But when that Jeff Johns run started pre Sinestro Corps War, I went back and started reading both Green Lantern and Green Lantern Corps as they were coming out. I worked at a comic book shop, and kind of just once it started getting into the 4-book territory, and then they had like the Sinestro book come out, it was getting to be way too much for me. So right now we're kind of in a spot where there's only one Green Lantern book, and so I'm like, okay, this I can handle. So that's where I kind of am with my Green Lantern fandom. I'd love to hear your guys' secret origins. Myron, I kind of know yours. You've talked about it on the podcast. Phil, I don't think I'm as familiar with your relationship with Green Lantern.
Well, I much like you. I mean, I was born in '74, so I go pretty much way back. Mm-hmm. I think my first comic book I ever actually purchased would have been G.I. Joe that came out from Marvel in the 80s. And I started taking off with that, and then I started getting involved with Superman and Green Lantern back then. And of course, like yourself, I found an attachment to Kyle Rayner throughout his whole entire run too. Uh-huh. And then to mirror what you said, I started going back and filling in the holes. And then I started reading all the older stuff with Hal Jordan, and I started liking Hal Jordan a lot more than I liked Kyle Rayner. And of course, at the time, you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm just reading all these back issues of Hal Jordan, but I'm still following the adventures of Kyle Rayner. Are they ever going to bring back Hal Jordan? Mm-hmm. So then, lo and behold, kind of like stopped reading after a while. Kind of like you, I started just getting involved with girls, and started focusing on other things. And then I guess it would have been when Blackest Night. I mean, I was still reading comic, but I was just doing it piecemeal, And then when Blackest Night what came out, when I started hearing about Blackest Night, I was like, I need to go and read this, because everybody started talking about how great it was. And man, I'll tell you what, I went through the whole. After it was out and already released and everything, I went through the whole 70-something issue run with all the side issues and everything, and I just read through it all. I just ate it all up. And then I was like, I need to go back and start focusing on Green Lantern a little bit more. And that's when I started going into Rebirth and Sinestro Corps War, and here I am. I mean, I read all the titles now. I'm a big fan of all the Lanterns, minus Simon Baz. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't like trash talking about the guy. The thing about it is, it's like, if you're going to have a character like that, at least have the decency to utilize the character in some facet. And now he's just like fell off the face of the planet, so to speak. Nobody knows where he's at, what's happening. And I mean, I attached myself to Jessica Cruz really, really early on when she was teased back in Forever Evil. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, man, I hope they really, really, really start building a story arc around that character, because I think, I liked Aricia and I liked Saronic Natu, and and then when she started gaining more momentum, I was like, this is really cool. I really like Jessica Cruz. And of course, I always stayed with Hal Jordan. And here's where I'm at. I was a big fan of I still like the New 52 stuff. To me, it had its good and bad points. But to me, it's still stories that I really, really thoroughly enjoyed, even though some of them weren't that great.
I've hit a stall on New 52. I'm smack dab in the middle of the long-haired Hal Jordan with the trench coat look.
Oh, I loved it. I
can't get through it. I can't get through it. I don't know why.
That was one of my favorites of the New 52 was the Rogue. Yeah, I kind of liked how he went on his own and went rogue, because to me that's his style. He just he does his own thing, and and if nobody likes it, whatever. I'm going to still do my own thing, and I have to get through this by myself, and and it was really, really noble of him to eat it for the cause. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and here I'm at. I love Venditti's run, and I'm really, 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 really enjoying Grant Morrison and Liam Sharp's take on it. It's just really good.
I have opinions on it, and I think we can get to that in a little bit.
Sure.
But I'm really curious if Myron wants to share his origins with the character.
Sure. So I've been a comic book fan as long as I can remember. I'm 54 years old now, and the first book I can remember reading was in the late 60s. So it must have been, about the time I entered school, I was reading books, comics. And I was very, very sickly as a kid. I have a birth defect, which has left a lasting effect. Long story short, my esophagus wasn't connected to my stomach when I was born.
Okay.
So back in the 60s, there was no way to really check for that. Ultrasound technology wasn't where it is today.
Mm-hmm.
So the doctor that had delivered me had lost a baby to this birth defect because with my upper half connected to my lungs instead of connected to my stomach, the first time you had formula or mother's milk or what have you, you literally drowned. So the doctor I had lost a baby to that birth defect a few years before I was born.
Huh, that's interesting.
So he was basically testing every baby he was delivering. And they discovered I had that birth defect, and they were actually teaching the corrective procedure at Syracuse University Hospital. I'm in upstate New York. I'm about 2 hours from Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so my father drove me in 1964 in his car with a nurse and me in an incubator and drove me to Syracuse, and I had surgery the next day later. So I am very fortunate to be here even at all.
Yeah.
But the repercussions of the surgery is where the esophagus was reattached to the piece that went to the stomach. I have a pretty good stretch of scar tissue.
Okay.
So there's no elasticity there. There's a stricture there. So I struggle when I swallow.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a kid, I was very, very, very sickly because I had surgery on my lungs and my esophagus, and I would get sick a lot during the winter in particular. So I bided my time by reading. So I was reading at a very, very early age, and my parents were not very well to do financially. So back in the day, you used to be able to go to your local convenience store, and they would, they used to be able to take the covers off the comics and send them back for credit, and then they would polybag the comics. So you would get 5 or 6 comic books for a quarter that didn't have covers on them in a bag, and they were random. So I would books that way, and I latched on to Green Lantern right away from some old Silver Age books that were in those kind of things. This was 1972, 1973, so it was right around the time of Hard Traveling Heroes.
Okay.
But these books were a little bit before then, and I latched onto the character because for me, what it was about wasn't as much as I enjoyed the power ring and that stuff. It was about Hal Jordan's willpower. Back in the day, a lot of the Green Lantern stories weren't so much about adventure. I mean, there was a lot of adventure to it, but Hal would think his way out of the mysteries. He would think his way out of his situations and use scientific knowledge. Now Hal is written very much as the jet jockey who flies by the seat of his pants. But back then, there was a lot more scientific knowledge involved. The comics were very educational back then. And so I latched on to that whole willpower thing, and that actually helped me through a number of situations when I would choke as a child. Back then, parents were leaving their kids home alone when they were 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
They didn't. That was common practice, and so I was always told don't eat anything while we're gone, Myron, and of course I followed my parents to the letter. Of course not, and so I would get myself into some situations where I would get food lodged, and I would start to pass out because I couldn't get the food down. And the Green Lantern character and how Hal wouldn't panic in a tight situation really, really gave me inspiration. And I've said before that I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for Hal Jordan. And I sincerely mean that. It's that that character got me through situations. If you can imagine being 8 years old and blacking out and seeing spots in front of your eyes and you're struggling to get through that situation. I just, for me, on a very emotional core level, that character got me through those things. I would draw my inspiration from that. So that's why I actually do the blog of OA and the podcast, is because I've always felt this sense of owing the mythology for everything that I have in some degree.
You know, it's funny. Back in 2011, there was a lot of exciting Green Lantern stuff about to happen, and I spent a lot of time on Twitter discussing Green Lantern. And a friend of mine said that they had to put me on mute or unfollow me or something because they couldn't deal with all the Green Lantern talk. And so I kind of pushed it back a little bit, and I kind of been, you know, I really don't have any, you know, friends in the real world that like Green Lantern as much as I do. And so one night I'm just like, I need to get this out, and so I created the Twitter, the Book of Oa, which has nothing to do with the blog of Oa. Your blog, the blog of Oa, I'm assuming is a play on words for the Book of Oa, which is in universe. But it was just a way for me to be able to constantly talk about Green Lantern, and I would come across something Green Lantern related in some corner of the internet and want to share it, but I didn't want to inundate people on my regular Twitter. So I created this other Twitter account, and that's what I've been doing. And because of that, I noticed a lot of talk lately about Hal Jordan, and Hal Jordan being the most boring character to you know, wear a Green Lantern costume. And I would love to know your thoughts on that, Myron, after what you just said, how much Hal means to you. Because I mean, it's crazy. Like, although I like prefer Kyle Rayner, that I have a more personal connection with that character because I feel like a lot of his attributes are more like me. He reminds me of myself more than Hal Jordan does. I don't think I'll ever be a test pilot or what was he? He was an insurance man at one point. I don't think I'll ever,
toy salesman.
like, there's something about that
toy salesman
that I don't connect to. But at the same time, I feel like people saying Hal Jordan is boring, I don't want to say he's boring, and I just want one of the things is his origins really don't lend to why he's Green Lantern. Like, Batman became Batman because he's killed his parents. Superman became Superman because his Kryptonian attributes are like crazy on Earth and give him superpowers. What I do like about Hal Jordan, and I mean, I'm just gonna say he's a blank slate as far as a character, as far as his origins go. We've learned very recently that anyone could become a Green Lantern, but I like that with Hal Jordan, just like on the basis of him being a human, we can all relate to that and put ourselves in that role. So for me, I disagree with the whole notion that Hal Jordan is boring. Me too.
Would you say that Indiana Jones is boring?
No.
But yeah, they're very similar characters.
Yeah.
Because the action moves through them, the story moves around them.
Yeah.
For me, Hal Jordan was chosen because of his bravery and his honesty. If you go back to Showcase 22, those were the two defining qualities. And so if you go back and look at DC Comics from that era, characters were designed to be inspirational, not relatable. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of the disconnect comes for some people. And I think for the character of Hal Jordan, understanding the character comes from reading it over longevity. Just like Indiana Jones, they don't tell you why Indiana Jones necessarily does what he does. You learn little snippets over time, and that's what, for me, Hal's about. You know, for example, they make a lot up about Hal being a womanizer, and I think if you go back and look at the character's history, why Hal is the way he is about women makes so much sense. If you look at the body of the work, you know, if you look at the fact that Hal's father, Martin Jordan, and his mother, Jessica, not Jessica, what is his mother's name now?
Let's just Martha.
We'll just go with Martha. that's the go-to mother name.
Yeah, go for it.
But anyway, Hal's parents, the schism in their relationship came because she was afraid about Martin Jordan's career choices, and that caused the rift in their marriage. If there was stress in their marriage, that's what it revolved around. And Hal, as a young boy, saw that, you know, his father really loved flying and so on, and that was his passion. And I think he saw what it did to his mother, and in himself and in his situation of wearing a Green Lantern ring, he's probably thinking, geez, I don't want to put a woman I love in the same situation that my mother was in. So I'm going to distance myself from real emotional intimacy because I don't want to create that for someone who I deeply care about.
Yeah.
And so therefore I'm going to almost have this persona that I'm going to be someone who's going to keep himself apart. But at the same time, I have the basic human need for physical and emotional intimacy. So you're basically going to hook up with people versus having real, true, honest relationships.
Right.
And so for me, that's what's going on under the hood, but writers don't hit you over the head with it. And I think that's one of the differences is you really have to look at the character and look for his motivations in his actions and figure them out.
I agree. It sounds good. I never really the womanizing thing never really I would never really got into that part of the book as far as his relationships. I mean, I've been rereading Silver Age just because I love them so much. They're so easy to read. They do feel like they're for a young audience, where each panel will show you what's happening. Up at the top, there'll be descriptive text of what's happening, and then Green Lantern will be thinking about what he's doing, and it's redundant. But I've been rereading that, and it's funny watching his relationship with Carol at the beginning. He may come off as a little strong. That might be, because of the era it was written. But
that's what I was gonna say. A lot of it has to do with the time era these are produced in, and I think a lot of people like to draw a conclusion that's not really relevant to the times you live in now, as opposed to the times that these were reflected, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's in the comics he was really only going after Carol, who I believe he truly loved. But it is funny how things kind of change throughout the years, and that relationship is kind of come and gone. But
it's very cyclical. They would go through the phases of, it reminds me of the old Star Trek episode where Spock is talking to Stan in Amok Time, where he's talking about the having is, you may find the having is better, the wanting is better than the having. And that's kind of the relationship, is they want to be together, but once they're together, they don't necessarily get together for a good length of period of time because there's too much baggage with the Green Lantern ring and so on. Go ahead.
What's good about that, though, is that Carol understands that and allows Hal an out. And I feel like even though she doesn't want to do that, she understands. That's something that kind of came up in the Green Lantern, the animated series, in the second half of the one and only season, is that she said, what you're doing out there is more important than us. And you could tell she doesn't want to say that, but she gives him that opportunity she lets him off the hook. And I kind of like that.
She comes to terms with it. She comes to terms with it because she knows she can't change him.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of the whole womanizing thing comes from, writers for a long time played that whole Clark Kent, Lois Lane dynamic with Hal and Carol, and then they kind of got tired of that. So then what do they do? And, at one point you had Guy Gardner engaged to Carrie Limbo, and then Guy Gardner goes in a coma. And so Carrie Limbo embraces Hal and they almost get married. And then you had the unfortunate things that happened with Aricia, where, she was portrayed as being almost a teenage girl, and she falls for Hal, and that puppy love crush gets turned into something more. And they tried to explain it as she willed her ring to age her body physically along Earth lines, and that she really was older, but, and that didn't go well. So I think there's been, I think there was even a couple of episodes or issues of Justice League Europe where Hal and Power Girl hooked up. And so it kind of became this running thing where, Hal's got a girl in every spaceport kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting how a lot of people make allusions to Hal Jordan being like Captain Kirk. But if you think about the timeline, it's more like Captain Kirk is like Hal.
Yeah. I was thinking more like James Bond as well. Like there's something about him that kind of reminds me of that as well.
And I think it goes back to that whole thing is that James Bond can't afford to have a marriage.
Yeah, he can't be tied down. He got married once. I don't know. I don't know if you guys. I don't know if you follow that series. Did not work out well for him.
No, it didn't.
No, it didn't.
And I don't want to get into relationships of Kyle Rayner because that's going to open up a whole can of refrigerator.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I've been a fan for as long as I can. And like you were saying with the truth and honesty, or the bravery and honesty for Hal Jordan, I have a Kyle Rayner tattoo on my arm. I got it in 99. It's the original Kyle Rayner symbol, the kind of black and green, kind of yin-yang-y sort of symbol. And people who asked me what that was, I would just tell them it's a symbol that means bravery and honesty. And they would say, okay. And then people in the know knew that I was a nerd. So, yeah, I always love that
I have
bravery.
Hal Jordan. I have a Hal Jordan tattoo on my arm.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, well, I got Hal Jordan, I got the Flash, and I got Aquaman. So,
what about you, Myron? Have you done that yet?
I don't have any tattoos.
If you were to get one, would it be Green Lantern?
It would probably be a Green Lantern logo. Yeah.
Yeah, a big one around your chest.
That would be great.
Yeah. All right. So I had a couple of questions that I thought up over the week because and what's funny is this. I'll ask you the first one. Have you guys ever dreamed that you were a Green Lantern?
That's awesome. Myron, I'll let you go first.
All the time.
All the time? Really?
Yes. I often do.
That's funny because you know what? I've only had it once. And I remember having the ring. I was in the desert, and the desert floor just kind of fell away from me, and I flew around into the clouds. And unfortunately, it was one of those dreams that happened like right before you wake up. And so I didn't get to enjoy it that long. The funny thing is, though, I thought of this question like a week ago, and since then I've had a couple. But they've all been collector related. I collected.
Oh, that's funny.
But it's a dream state, so I got this really collectible figure that was a 12-inch figure of a Green Lantern who were conjoined twins, and one side was a Green Lantern, and the other side was part of the Sinestro Corps.
Oh, that's cool.
That actually would be a cool storyline.
Yeah, I don't know where it came from, but I was like, okay, cool. Do you have like a recurring dream, Myron?
No, it seems to be just a common thing of being a Green Lantern, and it's funny because I don't ever really encounter characters from the comics or anything. Mm-hmm. It's like all original alien type characters or aliens from other media, like characters from classic Star Trek or those races and things, or from Star Wars or something like that. It's almost like it's a mixed media kind of experience.
So Phil, you have none? Or do you?
Yep, I've had a couple. I think there's actually two vivid ones I do remember. One is that I got to meet him. I got to meet a member of the Green Lantern Corps, but there wasn't a face, right? It was a non-entity Green Lantern, and I got to sit down with him/her. I don't remember what sex it was, but I got to sit down with them and have a cup of coffee, and I got to talk about what it pertains and what it took to achieve the goals of being a Green Lantern and to living up to the standards of the Guardians at the time, because the Guardians were prevalent back in the time I had this dream. They're not so much now, but and then another one was I had a dream that Green Lantern came over to the Star Wars universe.
Okay.
And he had it out. I think it was Hal Jordan. I don't really recall, but he had it out with Boba Fett. And they had some kind of epic battle, and it was over. And I remember it was over one of the moons of Endor, or something like that. It was some off the wall thing, but a lot of that was reflective because I just watched a Star Wars film that day, and I think an issue of Green Lantern I read like a trade or something the prior day, and I think it was a combination of the both just coming to head in my conscience overnight.
What's funny is Boba Fett's dad was Abin Sur.
Yeah.
The actor.
Yeah, you're right.
And he was Aquaman's dad.
Yeah.
He was.
With the crazy dreams you had, well, I think it would be fun if you analyze your dreams, Phil. Like went to a dream and like someone that analyzes dreams, and it turns out that the Green Lantern that you had a cup of coffee with was Simon Baz. Some sort of weird.
Man. If I dream about that tonight, you're gonna get a hate-filled treat tomorrow.
I'm gonna get an unfollow and block. Have you guys ever? I mean, we've been reading Green Lantern forever. Have any of you guys thought of like a story idea that you wish that you can write and pitch to DC?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I have. Well, first of all, I'm in the middle of writing a treatment for a new film, But we won't get into that because that's totally, it's not going to happen. But if anyone wants to read it, hit me up. I'll send that to you.
Cool.
But I always would like to see like Jon Stewart in his like a limited series in a more military style book where he's part of like a kind of like a Navy SEAL type of team or like a Magnificent Seven where they're like an elite group within the Corps that does sort of these kind of undercover stealth missions. And, you have like the bomb expert, the explosives expert, and that kind of deal. But they're all like different Green Lanterns. Like you could have like Hannah, who'd be kind of the muscle, and you can have, just different characters and go off into like sort of these kind of like secret under the table Guardian missions that, that no one really wants to do and no one should really know about, but they kind of go in, get the job done, and come out. I think that would be kind of cool.
That would be kind of cool. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
You could even base that around the Vietnam era. It would be kind of really, really cool then, too.
Yeah.
When I have ideas for stories, they're usually combining past elements and retelling them in a different way. For example, when the Green Lantern movie was coming out, I've often felt that that movie would have been better had they used, rather than Legion and Hector Hammond, who was the two villains in the first draft, or doing Parallax and Hector Hammond, it would have been far more interesting in my mind to have done the not the Martian Manhunters, but the Manhunter robots. And that you discover during this, if you think about the Manhunters and them needing to have somebody who's kind of coordinating their efforts, and that being Sinestro. And that's how Sinestro is revealed near the end of the film, is that he's the one behind it, and then he escapes and goes off to make the Sinestro Corps War for the second film. Kind of would have been how I would have done that if I had been the person in charge. I have to rethink stories that are out there and how would I do them differently, more so than something completely original.
Yeah, the thing, I don't even know why I'm doing this. I think it's just so it's out of my head. Is it is a retelling. It's Hal Jordan, and the movie kind of centers around Hal's. Here we go. The thing that I don't really like about, now this is like might be blasphemous. The thing I don't like about Jeff Johns' secret origin story is that Hal's father's death, Martin Jordan's death, doesn't really affect him as a Green Lantern as much as it should, if that makes any sense. Like I said, Batman is Batman because his parents died, and that's always in the back of his mind. It kind of shapes who he is. I feel like
it's the same thing with Superman too,
Yeah. So there's something about the death of Martin Jordan that I feel it didn't get tied into that movie that well. Like at the end, Hal just has flashbacks of it and decides, okay, I'm going to have a lot of willpower. Like it didn't feel like cohesive. So I always thought that it would be cool to maybe when Ferris Aircraft started doing the paperwork and the investigation on Martin's death, they found out that the reason why his plane crashed was because of user error and it wasn't the equipment. And Hal can't sit with that. Hal can't even fathom the fact that his father was the reason why his plane crashed. And that eats away at him. And then when he becomes a Green Lantern, he finds out that Abin Sur crashed his spaceship and his ring failed because of user error. And he uses that drive and goes on essentially a detective mission across the universe with Sinestro to find out what really happened with Abin Sur. And I think through that storyline, through that case that they're following, Sinestro learns that there are things hidden from him by the Guardians, and he becomes more and more distrustful of the Guardians, and then finds that Abin Sur has been studying the other colors of the spectrum, so I'm pulling from comics and stuff, and that he comes across this yellow entity, element, or whatever, and presents it to the Guardians as, case number one, why the Guardians are hiding stuff from the Green Lantern Corps that they probably shouldn't. And that sends him on his path. But I always thought that the Martin Jordan's death should play more into what drives Hal. And I thought that would be a kind of a cool way to have that happen.
That's pretty deep. That would be a kind of a really, really good exploration.
And I know that the Abin Sur myth has been, or his crashing in why is he in a aircraft to begin with, and that's been rewritten a couple times. And I never understood why that connection was never made between Martin Jordan's crashing a plane and Abin Sur crashing a jet. Like, I feel like that's something that should, drive Hal Jordan. So, I could send you that if you want. I feel like, it's, I'm excited for the Green Lantern Corps movie. It comes out, according to IMDb, in a couple days. I don't know when
Justice League 2 came out, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm getting to the point now where if WB decides the next Green Lantern movie is Jessica Cruz centric, I think I'd be okay with that. What do you guys think?
I talked to Myron about that I think that was a long time ago. I mentioned the fact of them spearheading a female-driven Green Lantern movie. I would be okay with it, but they'd still need to add the element of Hal Jordan in there, because I think you're going to lose a lot of fandom if you just disregard his character entirely.
I mean, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. Who knows what's happening? Because you have the fans, the diehard fans, the Green Lantern fans, who are going to go see the movie regardless, and then you have the general public who only know of John Stewart, because we saw that in 2011.
Yeah, it's a tough draw. I mean, I don't envy anybody's position who wants to write a film of that magnitude, but I mean, and then again, reflectively, you got to think about like Jessica Cruz being this modern day Green Lantern, as opposed to the Hal Jordan of when, Myron grew up and that I've come to know and that you've come to know over the years, And
I feel like we all here want a proper Green Lantern film starring Hal Jordan, but I'm wondering, like, Myron, would you be cool if you found out that the next GL movie would be Jessica Cruz centric?
I don't think I would be cool with it, to be very honest.
Yeah,
I think too much. I think too much of the mythology is built around Hal Jordan's history. But again, that's if you're being true to the source material. And a lot of times in these movies, they don't feel beholden to that. Yeah. But I think Jeff Johns knows enough about the audience that if he did a Jessica Cruz centric and didn't include Hal in some way, I think he knows it wouldn't be received by a lot of fandom very well. Yeah. But I think that's the crux of the problem with Green Lantern right now, is that we have so many characters, it's become so divisive. When you go back to, you mentioned earlier the whole John Stewart thing back in 2011. Well, the mainstream public that knew Green Lantern from the Justice League cartoon knew John Stewart. Yet an even larger audience knew Green Lantern as Hal Jordan from the Super Friends. And so I think you always are going to have that weird dynamic, because there are, I think, an overabundance of Earth Lanterns. I think you're going to have that divisiveness no matter what you do.
Well, that's why you'd have to spin it as a Green Lantern Corps movie, and it wouldn't be that difficult to write all these characters in. Much like, and I've said this before, much like Guardians of the Galaxy. You have all these characters that you can include, and you can develop really well over the course of one movie.
Yeah, I think the problem for me is that at the core, you're chosen because you're the best among us, essentially.
Yeah.
How many people from the Earth are the best among everybody in the entire sector? Let alone, how can there be that many just from our continent?
Yeah.
It gets a little over the top. And it's almost like, I liken it to the Flash mythology. When Barry Allen was alive, he was the fastest man alive, but now he's not. And what makes the Flash unique? I mean, there's characters that complement the Batman character and the Batman family, but they don't take the place of Batman. But when you get to the Flash or you get to Green Lantern, the characters that were created kind of almost take the place of the original. Now, what's interesting is if you go back and look at the Silver Age history, Guy Gardner wasn't created to be Hal Jordan's backup. He really only appeared in one issue prior to John Stewart's arrival. And he was basically created to show why Hal was chosen and why Hal was the right choice. So that was why he was created. And then when Neil Adams wanted to create Jon Stewart, he and Julia Schwartz kind of had a butting of the heads because Julia Schwartz was falling back to, well, Guy Gardner's kind of the backup. And so that was why they brought Guy Gardner back in Green Lantern 87 and kind of got him hit by the bus to disable him so that John could get the ring. But even John was created not to be the Green Lantern, but he was created to be Hal's backup.
Yeah.
So I think that's a large crux of the problem.
And you bring up the Flash, and you know enough to know that the fandom is split between Wally West and Barry Allen. I mean, there's fans out there that are just livid about Heroes in Crisis,
right?
We're worried about Wally West dying and all this kind of stuff, and the Green Lantern Corps is 10 times worse because, like you said, all of them come from one continent, and then you're going to have a divisiveness against. Well, why don't they have a Green Lantern from, say, Africa? Why don't they have one from Russia? Why don't we have an Asian American Green Lantern or an Asian Green Lantern for that matter?
Or why don't we have an alien Green Lantern?
Right.
Yeah, like Abin Sur.
Right.
Abin Sur was our Green Lantern.
Right. To me, it's preposterous to think that of all the people and all the planets in our sector, that five or six people, all from North America, essentially, except for the new Teen Lantern, who's not really a Green Lantern, but except for that one character, they all come from North America.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's not forget about Simon Baz too.
Okay.
but I think it creates divisive fandom. I know.
Yeah.
I come from the days when I was a member of Heat, and going through that whole era after they destroyed the mythology and Hal Jordan as a character to make way for Kyle. I was a part of that whole experience, and it was not a good time for anyone, because you had people like myself who were like, you've kind of thrown out the baby with the bathwater, that were very upset about losing that entire mythology. You had those people being told, well, get over it and move on, which DC handled it horribly.
I was a teenage boy at the time and didn't care. I didn't have. I was reading. I was reading the book that I was reading, and that's just the way the story went. It's really funny. I had no idea all this was going on because I would get my book every month and I would just read it.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think some of it goes back to, and I think if you look at fandom today, it's the same way. It goes back to how much emotional investment do you have in character X?
Yeah.
And if you don't have, if you're reading the stories as nothing more than stories, it's easy to accept change. It's easy to accept villain turns and so on. But if you're really emotionally invested in a character, it's hard to accept when a character is not treated with the respect you think they deserve. And in some ways, it limits the creative process because you're stuck to keeping a certain character alive or a set of characters alive. And when you look at during the era when the Green Lantern animated series was on, and I had the good fortune to have conversations with Jim Krieg and Giancarlo Volpe, the producers of the show. One of the reasons why Razor and Aya were so popular was because they had to create characters that could really have true change.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You couldn't do that with Hal and Kilowog.
And it's one of those things where if anyone, for some odd reason, asks me where to start on Green Lantern, with the comics, it's usually I would say Rebirth is kind of a good, nice place to start. But for the most part, I tell them, watch the animated series. If you want to get a good sense of what Green Lantern is, do that. That series, I mean, we can talk about the next movie all we want, but I guarantee you everybody right now on this episode would rather have a season 2 than a feature film.
I would agree. I would completely agree with that. And
I feel
not only that, it's an unbiased approach to Green Lantern. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because while it is Hal Jordan centric, it's not Hal Jordan themed. Because like Myron said, you got Aya and you got Razor in there, and those were the prime characters throughout the whole entire series.
Yeah, the series opens with Razor.
Yeah,
and it ends with Razor as well. Oh gosh, that ending, that last shot was amazing.
It was a gut punch. Yeah.
Knowing that the series was, we all knew it was coming. Us Green Lantern fans, we kind of learned in 2011 that Green Lantern was on his way out, that he had kind of peaked as far as the public goes, And it's unfortunate. It really is. I feel like Green Lantern still, it's been 8 years since the movie came out. And it feels like he's gotten a bum rap ever since. And it really, as a Green Lantern fan, it really hurts.
It certainly does. And the sad thing is when you look at that animated series, the ratings were great.
Yeah.
But it was all down to basically a badly designed system that relies on toy sales to subsidize the creation of a TV show.
Well, and they haven't changed. I mean, WB hasn't changed that aspect alone. They did the same. They still continue to do the same thing. They did it with the movie, with the Green Lantern movie. They did the same thing with Batman versus Superman, Justice League. I mean, all these different movies that came out, they reflectively had no good marketing value behind them.
And I feel like I think after the dust had kind of settled in 2011, Warner Brothers came out and said that any issues that anyone had with the Green Lantern was due to the studio meddling too much. Like, as I look at my Art of Green Lantern movie book, there's definitely scenes in there that would have made the movie better. And WB admitted to doing that. And it seems like they've been meddling for a while, up until about, I would say, Wonder Woman and Aquaman. And I don't know if anyone still hasn't seen Shazam. It comes out next week on digital. I thought Shazam was phenomenal.
Yep.
I feel like with these movies coming out, with those three movies, Aquaman, Shazam, and Wonder Woman, it gives me hope for Green Lantern. It gives me hope that the next time they attempt to do a Green Lantern, whether it's, next year, which it's not going to happen, or any amount of time in the future, that whoever gets to do it will do it right. And I look forward to any sort of Green Lantern media besides the comics to make a comeback in a big bad way.
I can't see how they can possibly do it. I mean, it just seems like even just recently today they announced that the Shazam issue 7 was delayed, and everything Jeff Johns is doing has been delayed. It's the same thing as Doomsday Clock.
But I'm hoping that's due to the movies, because I don't read Shazam or Doomsday Clock, so I'm not super invested in it. I hope he's
sure.
I mean, he's scaling back his comic stuff a lot, I guess, but I'm hoping he's really focusing on these movies because.
I genuinely hope you're right.
Yeah.
I think, Ralph, you really hit it on the head when you talk about the film and studio meddling. I think Green Lantern, the movie, was a victim of traditional studio mentality versus the way that comic book films should be made, which, Marvel had the luxury of having their own studio. They called the shots. And I think you really had the traditional studio system interfering with the creation of that film. And they didn't trust people to make the film and do some of the things that I think fans would have come to have loved. I mean, for example, I don't think a lot of people know that the bar that Hal and Carol are in the Green Lantern film is called Broom's Bar.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't know it. And I think there were those little Easter eggs that were left out.
Yeah.
They got cut. And originally, Parallax was going to be very much more like the Bug.
Okay.
And somewhere along the way, they changed it.
They changed it to Krona, right? It's Krona?
Well, it's Krona. Krona becomes Parallax, but even the creation of the physical representation of the character, I remember seeing on a website that's now defunct called the Daily Blam, and they got to go down and tour the set, and they had basically artist rendering of Parallax, and he looked very much true to the comics. And I don't know whether the studio was like, the studio's thinking, well, the audience won't accept a sentient bug being, or what they were thinking.
Well, the design was around long enough, because if you bought like 5 of the Green Lantern movie action figures, you could put together a Parallax figure, and if I'm not mistaken, looked more like a Bug. I
don't recall.
I'm trying to remember if I remember that correctly, or maybe it was another one of my action figure dreams. So before we go, I'd like to discuss the current state of Green Lantern, which right now is pretty much, with the exception of a couple characters sprinkled out other books, we now only have one Green Lantern book. We have one monthly called The Green Lantern by Grant Morrison and Liam Sharp, and I'd love to discuss it with you guys real quick.
The Liam Sharp Green Lantern book with Grant Morrison, I think it's interesting. I think the book is timeless in a way, in that you could look at this run and it could fit in almost any era of Green Lantern, which is kind of interesting. But at the same time, it's a Grant Morrison book, so it's it's a lot of things are left out. It's not like your traditional comic. A lot of things are left for the reader to kind of put together. Mm-hmm. And so I think some people are struggling with it when you compare that to a Jeff Johns book.
Yeah.
Some people are loving it because they're filling in all the blanks and getting a lot of meat out of the book. And so I don't know as if it's the runaway hit. I don't think DC is necessarily marketing it the way they could. It's doing well in terms of sales. I think in terms of sales, it's the highest selling book that isn't an event, a team book, or has Batman in it.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Do you think he'll show up? You think Batman will show up? And
man, I hope not. He's in enough stuff. The character's in enough things. They don't need to put him in Green Lantern 2, man.
Yeah. I hear you.
Although I have to say, I love the dynamic between Batman and Green Lantern because
me too.
They have some things in common, but yet they come at things from opposite ways. One of my favorite interactions between Hal and Bruce is in The Brave and the Bold when they relaunched it a number of years ago, where Hal and Bruce are partnering together, and Bruce is really ticked off because Hal goes in with these big green lights ablazing, and Batman's trying to be stealthy, and they don't get along. But from Hal's perspective, it's that he's approaching it from a complete perspective. He's like, if I can go in and draw attention to myself, the bad guy's going to come at me and leave the helpless victim alone.
Uh-huh.
And Batman's whole thing is I got to sneak in so they don't even know I'm coming. And so there's such an interesting opposites attract thing going on there, which I think is kind of cool.
My favorite panel is when Hal Jordan punches Batman out in Rebirth.
In Rebirth,
if I could get that blown up and framed, I'm going to do that one of these days in my life because that's my favorite panel ever in the history of any comic book ever.
Just make sure you take Ethan Van Sciver's name off of it.
Yeah, we'll do.
that was just a dig at the I don't really want to get into it. That kind of goes along with the whole Green Lantern getting no respect. I feel like since 2011, the Deadpool movies and the Lego movies just won't stop making fun. They won't. Yeah. Like, can't we move on to Dark Phoenix or Hellboy or any of the other countless comic movies that didn't perform up to standard? But it's like, still
on the Green Thor films or something.
Yeah, just let us not feel kicked to the gutter.
Well, what does that say about? I mean, the thing about it what does that say about? More importantly, Ryan Reynolds. I mean, he wasn't exactly I'm not going to say that he was the best Green Lantern ever or that he fit the role, but I mean, they could have found other actors that would have probably excelled better than he did. And then he has this notion to go back and kick it. And it's like, okay, why are you doing that? Number one, it's irrelevant. You're well past it because Deadpool is your character now.
Yeah.
I mean, and not only that, people just have to let go of stuff,
It's one of those things where I feel like, I mean, I get it. We all knew that Green Lantern, the film, didn't perform up to expectations. I don't think it did horribly. It didn't. I don't believe it took a loss as far as the budget goes. But it makes sense for Deadpool, I guess. That's something Deadpool would bring up. I feel like for Ryan Reynolds, though, it's like I want to reach out to him and just say, hey, listen, I was personally in Hall H when you recited the Green Lantern Oath to that kid that requested it. And It was a great moment. And at that time, everybody was all on board with Green Lantern, including him. And I don't feel like it deserves to have its back turned on him. Like, I don't feel like he should turn his back on the character. Ryan Reynolds, I feel like, is probably the least of the problems for the film. I don't think he did a bad job. He brought a little more humor. I was fine with his portrayal. I think it was more the
studio's fault than his fault.
Yeah, and it's a shame that it's still, but Warner Brothers did make the Lego movies, and I read that Jonah Hill was going to be Green Lantern in the movie. I'm like, that's fine, cool. We've had Kevin Smith as Green Lantern in the Duck Dodgers episode. I'm cool with a comedian playing Hal Jordan, but just to make him it's just lame and being pointed out as lame. I haven't seen the second movie, but I'm assuming it's still the same joke.
Right. Hal Jordan is not meant to be a punchline.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, we were talking about Grant Morrison.
Yeah.
I got a little derailed. So I really want to hear you guys' take on the Grant Morrison book.
As I mentioned before, I'm not much of a reader, and it puts me to sleep. And I find that this is my first exposure to Grant Morrison. I'm not much I haven't read any of his books before, and I find it, for me, challenging to read on just a dialogue level.
Yep.
The dialogue is super dense, and add sort of alien slang into the mix, and it's like a lot of times impossible for me to get through. It takes me a while to get through the page, which is fine because I think Liam Sharp's art deserves as many glances as you can give it. At first, I wasn't a huge fan of his Hal. I think of all of the covers for the books, I think issue 1 is the weakest of them, but they continually get better and better, which is definitely a good thing. But I've come to really enjoy the book. It just, like I said, it's just challenging for me as a reader of my of my abilities. But I've been enjoying the stories. I like that they are kind of self-contained with a little bit of a through line as far as the quote seasons go. I've been enjoying it. It's it is nice to have one book a month. I'm sure it doesn't help you guys out on the podcast as far as content goes, and I hate that word, content. But what about you? What about you guys?
I think I've actually, when I first started it, it took me a few issues to get used to it because it was such a shift from Venditti's run.
Yeah.
And but after about 3 or 4, I was like, this is really, really rich. It is complex. I know what you're saying by the narrative. But that's just Grant Morrison, and I had to take that into context because he's such a different writer than what Venditti is, or for that matter, Abnett or Bendis or any of these other really, really good writers and that are doing comic books.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to see him explore a little bit more of the Green Lantern mythos by way of Sinestro. I'd like to see his take on Sinestro. I'd like to see Liam Sharp's version.
It was
of what
teased.
Sinestro looks like.
It was teased.
I like.
Was that our Sinestro?
Was
that our Sinestro though?
I don't know. It looked cool though. I gotta say, that one drawing of Sinestro, I'm like, wow, that's a really sharp looking Sinestro.
Yeah.
So
I like what he did with. I like Carol Ferris. I love the way she looks. This new take on her.
And once again, is that our Carol Ferris? According to the synopsis, we don't. It says
right.
We don't. Yeah, right. So I haven't read it yet, so I don't know how it's going to take as far as the narrative goes.
Yeah.
But Liam Sharp, I think he does the book extreme justice. He just his backgrounds and his visuals are stunning. But I'm anxious to see where it goes, and I'm gonna still give it my all.
Yeah.
Just like I always do.
And Myron, I know I read the reviews on the blog of OA. I know you have glowing things to say about it.
I think it's interesting because I think you hit it on the head a little bit in terms of the density of the book. It's not a book you can read through one time and get everything out of it. Which in a way it's so opposed to, even during the Jeff Johns run, you could pick up an issue of Green Lantern and probably read it in about 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And this really isn't that. I find myself rereading things, looking at things. I feel like I get more value for my money that way, but at the same time, it's not a quick read. Like I can sit down and just, I'm going to read this book. Yeah. I have to set aside more time to read it because I know I'm going to have to read it more than once.
Yeah.
I've read some other Grant Morrison stuff before. I didn't like his Batman run in particular. And Multiversity, I still don't understand what happened in that book. So when I heard that Grant Morrison was going to be on the book, and I heard about it before it was announced, and there were rumors out there at the time, but when I had been told, every now and then people inside the industry will drop me little notes. And so I'd heard about it. I'm like, oh gosh. And the person who told me about it said, yeah, the thing is what version of Grant Morrison are you going to get? And that to me is the thing is you could read an issue and you might get a Morrison that's very straightforward. I think if you read that issue where Hal's inside the power ring, it's a fair 7. I think it was 7. It's almost a fairy tale, but at the same time, it's so meaningful to the character and his relationship to the ring, but it's not your standard superhero fare by any stretch.
Yeah.
Sure. Very good point.
Yeah. The only issue I have with the book was that issue where Hal was in the ring, and that's the lettering. I find it physically hard to read specifically in that issue, and I feel like the words on the covers aren't aesthetically pleasing or kind of block a lot of the art.
Yep.
But other than that, I've been enjoying the book, and yeah, it is the one book that I have to kind of separate myself from my wife and cats because I can't, like, any sort of distraction. It's like impossible. Like, I have to sit there and my brain has to physically read every single word and decipher the sentence.
Yeah, you're right.
I think Myron, you said it best when you said that, it'd be a lot more palpable to take it all in if you had it in a trade. If you said, okay, 1 through 6 is combined, I'm going to read all 1 through 6 and sit there all at one sitting, and I think it's a little easier to intake.
Yeah. I think if I look at the preceding era of Green Lantern, I would go to my local comic shop and get the comics, and I'd sit in my car and I'd read them before I'd leave. So I could read a book rather quickly and get enough out of it and put it down. Well, now it's like, okay, I've got the book. I've got to kind of carve out some time where I don't have any distractions because I need to put concerted effort into picking apart this issue.
Yeah. I don't know how you pick up on the stuff you pick up either, because I listen to the podcast. I have to listen to your podcast to kind of fully understand what's happening.
He does, man. Myron's a guru when it comes to that stuff. He pulls stuff out that's like, okay, where on earth did you find that? I'm sorry, where on Oa did you put that out there?
Well, yeah, and I appreciate that because, and earlier you talked about the Book of Oa versus the Blog of Oa. I chose the title Blog of Oa as a riff on Book of Oa.
Yeah.
And my whole thing about doing this was that the character has given me so much. I wanted to give back to the legacy of the characters. That's one thing. But at the same time, I wanted to provide something for other fans, a resource or whatever. And if I can enhance somebody else's fan experience, I'm being a good ambassador for the franchise. And that's ultimately what my goal is to be a good ambassador for Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate when people look to my reviews or the podcast and they're getting, it's enhancing their experience, because this book in particular really begs for that extra layer.
Yeah. And especially with your knowledge from Green Lantern's entire history, it helps also pick out things. You might see a random character in the background that no one would think twice about, but you point out, hey, this is so-and-so, and they're around in this era, and this is what they're about. And it's like, okay, I'm getting a lot more from the book than I normally would just reading it, which is really helpful and really nice. And it kind of enhances my enjoyment of the book.
Well, and if I could add this little caveat, that's one of the reasons why I'm sitting here today. A lot of it has to do with Myron's knowledge of the Green Lantern mythology, because as much as I've read, I will never attain the knowledge that he has on the character itself. And not only that, he's helped me along the way fill in spots that, I've overlooked or I don't see, or stuff that's like, okay, I missed that, and Myron has done that time and again. That's why I've listened to his podcast for, looking at how long now, and that's why I'm a part of it now. It's just like, wow, it's an honor and a privilege to be here along with him, because, without him, I wouldn't be able to do a podcast like that on my own. I wouldn't have the knowledge base that he does.
Well, the scary thing I'll say is, as I'm getting older, I'm having a harder time remembering certain things. So if I could give the two of you any advice, is don't get older.
Okay. Promise.
But it is a challenge. And I do find, like, I'll read certain things and I'll remember, like, this character will look familiar, and I have to Google it because I can't remember the details, but I know that character means something. Like Volk, for example. Yeah. I don't remember Volk in particular, but I remember the character design because it's so off the wall that I knew he wasn't a new character. So I myself had to go back and look, but I knew enough to know to look. I guess that's part of it.
Yeah.
But that's what makes you a good source material. Because you do that kind of research. And I found myself doing the same exact thing because, I reflectively want to be a lot on par with how you come at the character in the book itself.
I blame some of that on the Jeff Johns era, because Jeff Johns was like, I found myself second guessing Jeff Johns between issues, trying to figure out what the heck is this guy doing, because it was such an exciting time to be reading Green Lantern, because he was adding all these new elements, and you knew that when he did certain things, they weren't just randomly thrown in; they were very intentional. And so I would love to spend time in between issues trying to figure out what the heck is Johns leading up to.
Yeah.
And so that's now I read everything that way. I read everything with a different eye towards the source material about what are they trying to do? What are they setting up for? Which in some ways could be bad, but
when the Jeff Johns run happened and he started kind of teasing inklings for like the Sinestro Corps, what were your thoughts on that? Like, as it was happening, as it was unfolding, did you think to yourself, like, how has nobody thought to do this before?
Oh yeah, when he did the first day of the Sinestro Corps, I'm like, in the whole emotional spectrum as it was unfolding, I was hitting myself in the head going, why didn't anybody think of this before? Because it makes so much sense having these different color rings. Now, I think to Jeff Johns' detriment is he got a little too wrapped up in that stuff after Blackest Night in particular. I think after Blackest Night, he kind of lost his way a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, Brightest Day and War of the Green Lanterns weren't my favorite.
Yeah, no. and I've never liked the idea of Guardians as the villains. Yeah. To me, I always liked them as the altruistic beings who are so disconnected from everyday life that they don't really appreciate the value of individual human beings. And it's just because
politicians.
Yes, and from 100,000-mile view that they don't afford themselves the luxury of relating to the common person.
Yeah. I always liked that dynamic.
But yeah, when he did the whole Yellow Lantern thing, I was like, oh man, why didn't we think of this before? It was always the antimatter thing, but now it's this emotional spectrum thing, and Roy G. Biv, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's been there all along.
And he retconned Parallax, and it just all worked so neatly. It's crazy how he was able to pull off that tightrope act.
I don't think I was ever as excited for a book as I was for Green Lantern Rebirth, because I had such a hard time swallowing Emerald Twilight. And not just because of what it did to Hal, but what it did to the whole mythology and how it ignored parts of the mythology. To me, it was kind of a hack job. The original Emerald Twilight, to me, would have been a better thing for the source material. You would have still gotten Kyle. You would have still gotten Hal off the book kind of thing, but it wouldn't have been as sensationalistic or as controversial as it was. But I was never as excited as seeing Jeff Johns and coming back and figuring out a way to take all those different elements and make them work in a way that suddenly made Emerald Twilight make sense.
Those were the days.
Oh yeah, that was the heyday, that whole era, and I think that's part of the reason why the Green Lantern film is such a bit of a letdown. I think if Green Lantern hadn't been such a hyped character at that point, maybe it wouldn't have been as poorly received. But I think we got such great expectations because we went through Rebirth and we went through Sinestro Corps War and all that stuff. That, I mean, you would go to a convention, a comic book convention, and the Green Lantern cosplay would be off the chain. The expectations were so high that I think that there was no way to make it not be a failure in some regard.
Yeah.
Well,
hopefully we'll have something in the future. I think that's all I have. I mean, I could talk about Green Lantern for days, but you guys are on a different timeline than me. It's only 7 at night here. It's a little bit later for you guys, so I'm thinking I should let you guys go. But before I do you guys have any more thoughts you want to talk about? Anything to plug? You didn't hear this, but at the beginning of the show, I mentioned, of course, the blog of OA, which Myron runs, and the podcast OA, which is co-hosted by both of you guys. I highly recommend you check that out. But is there anything else you'd like to discuss before recharging your rings?
I wouldn't mind plugging this, Myron, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
This has nothing to do with Green Lantern related material, but my wife and I had our first ultrasound this morning, and she is 10 and a half weeks along, and the baby is due January 22nd, which is one day after my birthday.
And so, I've congratulated you off the air, Phil, but
this is the first official announcement.
on the air. This is the official announcement. Obviously, our biggest congratulations to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, guys, and I just wanted to include that on your show. I'll announce it when we do ours next week, hopefully as well. But why not? I'll include it on this one.
And if you have a boy, Simon is a good name. Bruce is a good name.
Duly noted, and a big fat no on that one.
Well, Simon and Bruce could be a good middle name. It'd be Simon Bruce.
That would be really, really good. Or I could do, if it's a girl, I could do Martha, because it seems like Martha seems to do that.
I don't know whether you've seen this, but I want to kind of plug it. Green Lantern Ring of Victory. It's an audio drama that's being created by fans. Done by the guy who did the animated comic version of the Larfleeze Christmas special. And that comes out on June 29th on YouTube.
That's going to be good. That's going to be good.
So, yeah, I'm excited about that. So I kind of want to plug that. And just for listeners of the podcast of OA, we've been trying to hit as many media outlets as we can for ways to get to the show. And you can now find the podcast of OA on radio.com. So
that's cool.
That's a recent thing. Now, it's only right now. Now, I do the podcast of OA through Libsyn. That's my podcast host.
As do I.
Oh, okay. So you can do radio.com through them now as a output source. But it's only available on cell phones right now. They don't have the web interface or the Roku TV interface set to work with the Libsyn podcasts. But but yeah, radio.com is a recent addition. So
cool.
It's another way to get to the show.
Awesome.
For me, I don't put a lot of effort into plugging all these different media portals, but whenever there's an opportunity to get the show out there in another way or another avenue for people to find it, I'm all on top of that,
Yeah. That's
really
cool.
Man.
And then for me, for even my listeners who don't know that I have a whole separate Green Lantern account on Instagram and Twitter. That's at The Book of Oa. And that's just me. Anytime I see something Green Lantern related, I post it. I'll post anything Green Lantern related with the exception of one thing.
Simon Bass.
Actors photoshopped as Green Lantern. I do not post.
Terrible.
I don't like those. I don't like those
I
at
hate
all.
I hate it when somebody jumps on board and puts it as here's so-and-so as Green Lantern. They get people hyped up thinking that they've been cast. And it's basically just clickbait.
Yeah.
It's like Tom Cruise. It's like the Tom Cruise thing. It's like, oh, God.
Yeah, check out Tom Cruise in this new Green Lantern image. That's usually the I get those.
Yeah. I have that problem when I'm writing for the blog. I don't like to pick up on the rumor things, because what happens is one person starts a rumor and then enough media outlets pick up on it and repeat it that people start thinking it's factual.
Yeah,
they do.
And so
they really do.
I try not to, and I'm sure I don't get as much traffic as I could because I don't subscribe to that mentality. But for me, it's about the integrity of the content.
Yeah, that's good for you. I think as far as like the regular news outlets, because I don't post rumor stuff either, but if the studios happen to see that there's some sort of interest in this stuff, I'd be okay with them starting to actually work on this movie. or get the show back somehow, which I don't think will ever happen, but I have enough blue hope to wish it to happen. But it's a shame. But right now I'm glad there's a community where Green Lantern fans could get together. I'm glad social media exists solely for that fact. I don't care about all the other stuff that happens on social media, but I'm glad there is a place for people who like Green Lantern to come together and discuss our favorite character. So that's really nice. And to you guys, thank you so much for coming on and for being a shining light in this this dark, vast universe for Green Lantern, because it just needs to be out there. And I'm glad that where mainstream media is a little bit negative on the character, I'm glad that there's people out there who know better. So thank you guys very much for coming on and having me. Man. And don't be a stranger. I can talk about Green Lantern all day, like I said. So hopefully in the future we'll get some news and it'll bring us together again.
That would be great.
Yeah,
it would be great.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, man.
All right.
This is Robert Vendetti, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
So thanks for sticking around and listening to Ralph and Phil and I chat about Green Lantern. And I hope you found it insightful or interesting, or at the very least entertaining. So Phil and I should be back in a couple of weeks to be chatting about the newest issue of the Green Lantern. And we'll see what happens between now and then, if any other interesting news comes out. So until next time, as always, please keep your power ring charged, take care of each other, and make every day your brightest day. Take care now. The Podcast of Oa is the official podcast of the blog of Oa and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.